Hello YouTube, welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy and this is Scruffy Tales. And this is actually part 2 where I'm covering the new 50mm chain gun that the United States will have on its next infantry fighting vehicle. Because I messed up the proportions of the ammunition involved in my previous video, but we're gonna sort everything out in this video. So here we have it. Is there a problem with the new 50mm chain gun? And I think there is, and I might upset a couple of Americans, just like I said in the previous video. So let's take a look at it. So, by all accounts, the new 50mm chain gun that the US will adopt for its next infantry fighting vehicle will be designed to deal with infantry, drones, and helicopters and armored transports such as APCs and IFVs. But it will not be able to be a credible threat to tanks. And this is potentially a big problem. In Ukraine, during the now famous engagement between a Ukrainian Bradley and a Russian T-90, we saw how easy it is to come across a tank at close distances. In a town or in a forest, fighting distances will be close, and there will not be time to rely upon an ATGM to deal with the tank. Nor can you effectively rely on an airstrike to hit the enemy if you are engaged in a firefight along a street or in a wooded area. Looking at the Stepova shootout, we clearly see the Bradley failing in dealing damage to the T-90. The T-90 is throughout the fight moving back and forth, the driver trying to be as difficult a target as possible. Meanwhile, the gunner is constantly moving his turret left and right, looking for the Bradley. So while it is impressive to look at as the smoke launchers pop off as they get hit by the Bradley, we quickly realize that the Bradley is in serious trouble because the 25mm is not powerful enough to deal with the tank, and the crew in the T-90 appear to be experienced. In the end, it is in fact a design flaw within the T-90 that defeats it, as the turret begins to spin. The driver then moves the tank into a tree to allow all three crew to climb outside. We can conclude that the Bradley was extremely lucky to leave that engagement intact and with no casualties. Some might remark that a Bradley has a tow launcher, as will its replacement. Well, imagine if the launcher was a gun. It carries 2 rounds that requires an extreme amount of time to reload, and it takes 7 to 9 seconds to get the weapon ready to shoot. You must then remain stationary and exposed to incoming fire while you aim at the enemy. You must remain stationary and exposed to incoming fire as you fire, and remain stationary and exposed to incoming fire while you guide the round during several seconds towards the target. A target that can maneuver while you perform all the actions just mentioned, a target that can go into cover, deploy smoke, or even worse, open fire while your round, aka missile, is still airborne, which could mean the target kills you before you hit, even if you fired first. Your ATGM is also ineffective in an urban environment where fighting distances are close and enemies can pop up quickly around a corner, and where debris, rubble, and wreckages will snare and entangle the wire guiding the missile. All of the above is equally true in a forested region, but with trees, bushes, branches, twigs, etc. being an even greater obstacle to the wire of the missile. So if the ATGM was an anti-tank gun mounted on the IFV, would you consider it a reliable weapon when facing an armored threat at close distances? The hazards of facing a tank in these situations, when you must maneuver but still be able to engage a tank, is why some armies have adopted a powerful gun instead of relying on an ATGM system to deal with tanks. Most famously, we have the Swedish 40mm Bofors mounted on the CV-90 infantry fighting vehicle, an autocannon firing 5 rounds per second, capable of easily penetrating the armor of a T-72 with a flanking shot, even a modern T-90 like the one we saw in Stepove. This is expertly shown by SY simulations, and a link will be provided below. The images used here are from that video. Recently, the British and French have developed a new gun and a new type of ammunition. The CT-40 uses telescopic 40mm ammunition, and despite being more compact than a traditional 40mm round, it still is just as powerful and capable of being a threat to armored targets. So as you can imagine, these guns have a massive tactical advantage when compared to other guns relying on 25mm, 30mm, and even 35mm ammunition, and maintains that advantage at short and medium range even when these other guns have ATGMs as backup. The new 50mm chain gun will in essence be a modified 35mm Bushmaster. The old 35mm uses ammunition that is 35 times 228, and the new 50mm will be 50 times 228. The main difference being that the casing is extended to be full neck on the new 50mm. What this means is that in terms of defeating armor, the new 50mm will have roughly the same capabilities as the old 35mm, since you only get slightly more propellant in the new rounds. Compare this to the older 50mm Supershot, an anti-tank round made for the 50mm conversion of the old 35mm weapon. As you can see, the Supershot on the far right is extended to be 50mm times 330, thus containing more propellant than the standard 35mm. But the new 50mm system, as we've pointed out, will not extend the casing to fit more propellant, but will only fit slightly more propellant than in the older standard 35mm rounds. This means that the new 50mm chain gun will only be capable of being a threat to armored transports such as APCs and IFVs. Looking around, I have found that the 50mm chain gun will be able to defeat a BMP-3 from the front, punching through 50mm of armor at 2 kilometers. This is a reasonable capability, since most IFVs around the world are designed to handle up to 30mm rounds striking their front armor. So hitting harder than the 35mm is a good choice when dealing with armored transports, since it will guarantee results on impact. So how does the new 50mm compare to the 40mm systems? Well, we know the capability of the 40mm Bofors, and we also know that the new British-French CT-40 gun can penetrate 150mm of armor at 1500 meters, plus that it is comparable with the power of the Bofors gun. Compare this with the new 50mm being capable of punching through 50mm of armor at 2000 meters. Looking at the images, we can clearly see how the 40mm Bofors has a larger casing and allows for a lot more power behind any sabot dart being launched if compared to the new 50mm chain gun. And the design of the CT-40, where the dart is encased within the casing itself, the dart is surrounded by propellant within a much wider shell, providing it all the power it needs to compete with the older 40mm Bofors. These two 40mm systems, both the older Swedish gun as well as the newer British-French weapon, pack enough kinetic energy to be a threat to tanks. This is not the case with the new 50mm chain gun. And even the programmable ammunition for the new 50mm isn't really a game changer, since both the Swedish and South Korean 40mm autocannons have used programmable ammunition for decades. For instance, the Swedish programmable 40mm round exists also as a 57mm round for naval guns, known as 3P, has 6 modes of attack, capable of engaging IFVs, helicopters, drones, blasting trenches with airburst, and can even engage incoming missiles. An IFV is an aggressive vehicle as a consequence of its intended role, to follow tanks into armored combat, to transport troops into the thick of the fight and stay around and support both infantry and tanks in hard-fought battles. This means that an IFV will eventually end up coming face to face with an enemy tank. And in that situation, if the IFV does not have the right gun, only luck will save it, like we saw in Stepove. The new US IFV that will replace the Bradley will without a doubt be extremely dangerous towards enemy infantry, drones and helicopters. But I am a bit concerned that it will still fall short in its intended role as an IFV, facing a peer adversary, if it cannot be a threat to tanks at close or medium ranges. The Chaingun system will have a few advantages, that must be said. It will carry more ammunition than the 40mm weapons. And I believe the 50mm will have 80 rounds in the feeding system ready to be fired. Compare this to the 24 in a Swedish CV90 armed with a 40mm Bofors. That said, I've seen numbers between 60 to 100 rounds ready to fire using the CT40. But would you rather have 80 rounds that are unlikely to penetrate a tank's armor? Or would you rather have 24 rounds that stands a good chance of penetrating a tank's armor? Or better yet, 60 to 100 rounds that stands a good chance of penetrating a tank's armor? ATGMs are powerful weapons and extremely deadly, and when set up properly will easily destroy an enemy tank. And they will get even deadlier. Trials are already being made where an IFV relies on a drone to locate an armored target, and using the images from the drone to guide in an ATGM fired from behind cover, beyond line of sight. A capability I am certain the next US IFV will possess. But even this ability will not be enough to save an IFV if the enemy tank appears out of nowhere at close distance. So feel free to rip everything I just said apart, agree or disagree, leave a comment. Is the ATGM enough to handle tanks? Is the new 50mm too weak for the modern battlefield? Is it doctrinal? Does US armament doctrine allow an IFV to get away with not having a powerful gun? Or is the 50mm more powerful than we think? What are your thoughts? Let me know down below. So there we go. Yeah, not much else to add, I think. I think I got most of it correct this time around. Point still stands though from the previous video. The 50mm ammo appears to be too small for the task at hand, incredibly enough. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Remember, size matters. See you around.